Hey guys, welcome to today's show. So I've got a very special guest today. His name is Matty Hawthorne. Matty is just one of those guys that just gets along with everyone. And he leads with humility and grace, and he has a very keen and big heart to help others in need. He found out actually early in his childhood that at school, to be precise, that he just wasn't wired to behave in a controlled environment. I was like, oh, that makes, I can relate to that. I don't know who likes to be in a controlled environment and kind of be pushed and pulled and told what to do. But maybe we can touch on that a little bit later and how that's really shaped Matty's choices as he's grown up. He's married to Hannah, beautiful Hannah, and they are expecting their first baby along the way. They also have a lovely dog called Buddy. And Matty loves traveling, walking, reading, and learning. Matty, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Andy. It's great to be here.
Perfect. So let's dive right in. Matty, could you briefly share your background with us, just to give an idea of the type of things that have happened that have shaped you to become the person that you are today?
Yes. Where do I start? Let's start with the person I am today. So I'm 36. I live just around the corner from you in Manchester.
You do.
And I've just today, well, this week, quit my job to go into the world of entrepreneurship and coaching and leading people in a new way. And so it's kind of a step of faith, but it's at the end of about 20 years of working in full-time Christian ministry, doing social entrepreneurship, starting projects, helping people, working with people who are on the margins, doing youth work, and also working for some church kind of ministry. So that's been my kind of career. I grew up in South Shropshire and North Herefordshire in the Shire, in the middle of nowhere, and moved to Manchester last home really early, just after my 17th birthday. And like you said, I love kind of walking, exploring, traveling, rambling. I've also got a big passion for music, and somewhere way in my history, I was a hip hop DJ as well, which some people don't know about me. Yeah,
there's a lot to unpack in there. One thing that I know that wasn't mentioned was actually how you came into the world.
Yeah,
that wasn't as smooth sailing as maybe your parents had hoped it would be. Do you mind sharing a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I was actually born in Wales because my mum and dad had a visit to my grandparents' farm in Wales, and I arrived early, and I was a tiny baby, 4 pounds. And when I was born, pretty soon they realised something wasn't right because I wasn't digesting food. So I was rushed to hospital, and they discovered that I wasn't actually able to consume food because of a problem in my colon. And so as a newborn, I had this big operation on my stomach, and I've still got the scar to prove it. But actually in that operation, my lungs stopped working and I stopped breathing. And it transpired that I was born with a trachea, a windpipe, which was very, very narrow. And so I had kind of 7 years of breathing through my neck after that, because I was given an emergency tracheostomy, which is this tube that goes into your windpipe. And I was that special kid. And I had all sorts of operations. I was pronounced dead a couple of times and resuscitated. And my parents were people of faith and prayed, and had all sorts of Christians and church members rallying around them praying. And I believe that I was a bit of a miracle baby. And by the time I got to kind of 10, 11, 12, my windpipe had grown to the point where I could, be pretty normal, learn to swim, start running, cycling, all that sort of stuff. And nowadays I'm completely fine. After many years of being, quite disabled in various ways. And my mum and dad, particularly my mum, was an absolute hero in caring for me, coming into school with me, taking me to numerous hospital stays, for months on end. And so, yeah, that was my start, which is pretty unusual. And I think, kind of, if I was born a few decades before that, I almost certainly wouldn't have survived. And some of the prognosis around that was that I wasn't meant to speak. I was meant to be deaf. And all sorts of other things. So certainly, I'm very grateful to those people who intervened early in my childhood to, keep me alive. Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. So yeah, what a miracle, as you said, extra special miracle. That's incredible. Yeah. So you said, so that was, and you were you said you were kind of fine around the age of 10, 11, 12, where you had the windpipe taken out. How did that then kind of mold you in your teenage years? Like, did it affect anything at all with regards to growing up, school?
I think it did. So I think partly being the kid who wasn't allowed to do things like go swimming and run and be kind of the boisterous young lad that I probably was somewhere inside, I kind of pendulum the other way and was always not kind of incredibly naughty as a younger teenager, but a bit cheeky and rebellious, and then got to high school and just hated it. Apart from anything else, hated the environment, but also, started pushing boundaries like teenagers do. And probably because of being restricted and confined as a child, I guess that kind of came out in other ways when I was a teenager. And I've got some stories to tell there about kind of the antics that I got up to, but maybe not for YouTube.
Sounds like another episode right there, Matty.
Yes.
So how did you then, so did you go to university? And what was your first job after that, if it was a job that you went into?
Yeah, like I said, I really didn't like school at all. And you said about kind of not liking controlled or confined environments. And I think for me, I just didn't like being told what to do at school. I didn't like the learning style. I didn't like the kind of being around all the peers. I had, close mates, but actually I could not wait to leave school. And so I left at 16 and I got a job fitting sound systems. And my job, this is in the late 90s, was to tie a wire around my hand and crawl under floorboards and poke this wire out the other end and fit speaker systems into theatres and businesses and all that sort of thing. And then rather than going to uni at 17, 18, I actually left home and moved to Manchester from the middle of nowhere. I moved from quite a beautiful place where the view out of my window was trees and rolling hills and cows and fields. And I moved when I was 17 to what was then the poorest council ward in the UK, a place called Bench Hill in Wythenshawe. And the contrast, being a naive teenager, I didn't really take in what I was doing, but the contrast was extraordinary between, this rural abyss to this place where there was, prostitution, drug dealing, loads of boarded up houses, and really, quite severe social deprivation. And it's in a place called Wythenshawe, which isn't far from where we live in Stockport, and has since had huge regeneration. But I moved on to what was called Eden, and it's part of this Christian youth project, which I had some friends on. And so it was a bit of a kind of baptism of fire into city life. And with that, got into hip hop music and DJing, and did some study around event promotion, DJing, music production.
Wow.
Years later, I actually went back to study at the Open University, psychology and criminology. And then only a few years ago, I studied theology at Westminster Theological Centre. So I've done bits of study and gone back to it, but kind of on my own terms. And I think every time I've dipped my toe into academia, the older I get, the more I love study and learning. But certainly when I was a teenager, I battled against that stuff.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? I mean, you almost have to enter something at the right time. Even if it's the right thing, it might not be at the right time or right stage or right season to do it. And then so, our heart is not quite attuned to really exploring it in that moment.
Yeah.
And so in and around that, you've also been serving in full-time ministry, right? Because I know I think that the first time that we met was when you were leading a site at a church, the church that I go to, Ivy Church. So how did you move into that, and what was that like for you?
Yeah, so I, like I said, I was a hip hop DJ, and that involved working, doing DJing in nightclubs, traveling around Europe and further afield, doing kind of big events and festivals, but also doing a lot of DJ workshops. And a lot of what I did working with the Eden team in Wythenshawe was actually getting alongside, particularly lads doing music workshops, putting on, this was kind of when UK garage was really big, and so put on garage nights with MCs and different DJs, and so really taught DJing. And found from my experience, a lot of these lads really engaged in doing something. I think it's a trait of men in particular, that we tend to get to know each other by doing rather than just sitting and nattering. So I taught young men DJing and music, and kind of ignited that passion in them that I had when I was kind of 14, 15, 16. But most of these guys got to a certain age and started getting in trouble with the law, and a lot of them ended up in young offenders prisons. So I started going in doing DJ workshops in prisons, and I just fell in love with that environment. The real fact that there's so much need, but actually there's so much response when you actually reach out and engage some of the young men who are behind bars. And it really started me working for about 10 years with mostly young offenders, but also adults in custody. And really went from doing DJ workshops and being a DJ tutor to being a bit like a youth chaplain in prison, doing Sunday services, but also pastoral support and things like anger management and working doing restorative justice. And from that, after 10 years, we had a load of young men who'd made some sort of commitment to faith, but church really wasn't ready for them. And they weren't ready for church. So I'd take them to a few churches and they'd either hate it and walk out or want a fag break or just shout out at the wrong time. And so me and Hannah, my wife, this is in about 2012, 11, started meeting in our living room with a load of these, I affectionately call them nutters. So, we had on a Wednesday night, a load of these guys come to our house for a Bible study and chatting about faith and life and, trying to settle after coming out of prison. And it really, almost by accident, became a church. And we were at this church, which we both attend, Andy, called Ivy. And Anthony there said, why don't you start something that's part of our church here? And so Ivy Sharston is the site you referred to. When we first met, I was leading that and did that for 4 years, and it's still going. And I'm just passionate about, obviously I have this personal faith in Jesus, but actually seeing people, particularly right on the margins, find hope and transformation. And I've seen that happen time and time again when people actually, transform inside. That's when a true transformation happens outside.
Sure.
So yeah, that's how I got into kind of what's called Christian ministry, kind of working full time for the church.
Yeah.
And really done that in different contexts and for different people for about 20 years now.
Yeah, that's incredible. That type of impact and the influence that you've had, along the way, there's been different projects that you've put yourself towards and different skills that you've learned, but always seem to have that kind of common theme.
Mm-hmm.
Would you agree that, where you are today and looking back, you could not have planned this as a kid? You could not have known this was the path that you would have gone down?
Yeah, absolutely not. And, I think I was really shy when I was a teenager. I was not I was quiet around people I didn't know. And the idea of kind of public speaking or kind of having a message to share, all of these sorts of things would have been a world away from who I was. And probably even 10 years ago, I didn't really have anything to say about anything. But nowadays, I really consider myself a communicator. I think I remember somebody saying one time about if you want to kind of track where you should go in your future, try and find a through line in what you have done or kind of a thread that goes all the way through. And nowadays I like to call myself an encourager. I just love not just encouraging people, but the whole thing of encouragement. It literally means to impart courage in another person. And I think I've always done that to some extent. Even as a quiet teenager, what I love to do is get alongside somebody who perhaps I recognize something about their struggle in them, in myself, and say, you can come out yourself, you can engage in something meaningful, you can do something like using music to draw out that passion, that expertise, and use that to help others. And so I think, there's always been some sort of through line like that. But, like you said, looking back, particularly at that scrawny kid who was born at 4 pounds and went down to 3 pounds and, had probably the worst prognosis. The idea, not that I'm, changing the world hugely, but the idea that 36 years later, I'm somebody with a voice and dreams and passions to do something that is hopefully going to change the world.
Absolutely. And I think, you say you're not changing the world hugely. I think you're making a massive impact. And, because I like to say that a lot of times we have no clue how much of a difference our actions are making to the world. We have no clue. It could be a little post on social media. It could be one conversation, but that conversation with that person who then shares it, who then changes the way that they are, that impacts their circle, that impacts their network and their community as well. And so you've got this cascading effect. But it's great. So I was asked what I was going to ask about, actually, when you look back, whether you saw a common thread that just kind of linked everything and connected everything together. Said that was really just the theme of being an encourager. Okay, that's fantastic. So with your the childhood aside, where you had to have a windpipe for the first decade of your life to help you breathe, what would you say were like the biggest lessons that you have learned, you know, the significant kind of shaping moments for you?
Mm. That's a good question. I think for me, like I said, I left home early and left education and really kind of moved to the city as a country kid when I was pretty young. When I meet people who've just turned 17 nowadays, I just think you were such a child. And the year after that, my mum and dad moved to India. And I think having, 6 years before I got married, of being a young adult and living on my own in a city made me really independent. I think to some extent that both shaped me and suited me. Like I alluded to earlier, I'm somebody who's probably a creative, probably somebody who thinks outside the box. And I think what shaped me is coming to terms with that not necessarily you have to be academic. You don't have to succeed in the ways that people think in order to be successful. I think there's something about your 30s as well where you're more self-assured and happy to not necessarily fit in. I don't think the best people do fit in, and that's a great thing. Also, I don't know if you've heard, Andy, of divergent and convergent thinking. This idea that actually to get to one answer, you need convergent thinking, where all ideas kind of get to one answer. And I think I'm a divergent thinker, where you start kind of and think, how many possible answers are there to this question? And just celebrating who you are, being able to say, it doesn't matter what your IQ is, because there's a creative way of being successful and having an impact. But also, I think a relational way of doing that. Some of what shaped me, I think, is actually meeting people and seeing their lives change through little simple things. Like you said, you never know how what you do is going to make a difference. Some of that's in prison, meeting people who are completely broken, and actually not just them, but generationally, kind of broken lives of addiction, neglect, abuse, and seeing them changed. But I think as well, recognizing that a little thing like you said about social media last year, I decided to really explore and tackle fear in my life for a whole year. And it was to do with being completely honest, it was to do with some issues that we had in our marriage, myself and Hannah, after 10 years of marriage. We just had some kind of, I guess, fear and tension around things that have been in our marriage from right at the foundations. And I was afraid to go there, digging up stuff from 10 years ago, the fact that kind of we'd not been very old and mature and probably not had the support around us that we needed. And so at the start of the year, I recorded this video, I put it on YouTube, and I had so many people who, putting that video out seemed like a huge thing. So that really impacted me. That was huge. There were strangers messaging me. So I think, like you said, social media is an amazing tool where we can put something out thinking it's just meaningless, but actually it can impact people. And quite often they'll never actually reach out to you, but we've got this amazing platform like you're doing now to be able to connect with people, potentially millions of people, but even if it's 10, 15 people, you only need one or two to make a real difference. So.
Yeah. And I love that, and that's what I was trying to actually reflect upon as you were sharing your answer there, how, you're willing to take risks, for your mission. You don't like to be confined, and clearly now it's not that you don't like to be confined, it's that you really enjoy the freedom of thinking about new possibilities and new options.
Yeah.
And to do that requires a level of risk, and sometimes with risk comes a bit of fear.
Yeah.
As you mentioned, though, you've become a lot more self-assured, and it makes sense if you've dedicated a whole year to dealing with fear, and to maybe sometimes having to go back and revisit certain like shaky foundations to make them solid again.
Yeah.
And the fact that you've invested in that and doing that means that you're in this much more solid place now. Because your marriage, I know we've talked recently, is incredible. It's amazing. You have a baby on the way. And you're in a very exciting time where you said you've just handed in your notice. Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, it's a great story, Matty. I really appreciate you sharing that.
Can I share the biggest lesson I learned from last year?
Absolutely.
So I think particularly for men as well, we tend to project, I call it kind of onto a mask, this idea of who we'd like to be. And social media can completely exasperate that. And So we kind of project potentially that we're okay, that we're doing well, that we're successful, that we're confident. And sometimes behind that mask, we're struggling, we're lonely, we're isolating. You know, there's stuff going on in our minds, in our hearts, in our actions, which we don't want to kind of publicly portray. And I think the biggest lesson I learned was actually that very mask that we put up to attract people to us is what ends up pushing people away, because they're actually attracted to a false version of ourselves. Whereas when you let that mask down and you're vulnerable and open up, that's when it's like an invitation for vulnerability from the other person. And so I remember at the start of this year, I went out the way to intentionally be vulnerable and open, and found that a lot of my friendships grew in depth in a way that I'd not really experienced before. And so, yeah, I'd encourage anyone to just have a go, practice being vulnerable. You know, because it can be a fearful thing. I think some of our biggest fears aren't things like spiders and flights and, you know, heights, but actually being honest and inviting people to see the parts of you that perhaps aren't the best looking. But when you do that, it's a real connection point. So,
yeah, I love it. That's a great way of putting it. You're right. You know, our fears mostly are the internal stuff that's going on rather than anything outside of ourselves. And that vulnerability, it's like when you model it, you're giving the people around you permission to be themselves as well. And so that's why it's reciprocated and awesome.
I call it the mask projection paradox. Yeah, that's my little phrase for it.
I love that, the MPP. So Matty, so that kind of like, so here we are now.
Yeah.
What is next? What is next?
So I've been working for Scripture Union, which is a brilliant and you know, really far-reaching Christian ministry, Christian charity in 150 countries, and really with a heart to see the 95% of children and young people outside the church connected with faith and church in a relevant way. But again, I think something about me wanting to be entrepreneurial, wanting to kind of not be under anybody, has struggled in this role, to be honest. I've had a really great role leading some creatives in a publishing department and people who are creating resources, but I've just had this dream for ages of getting into the business sphere, coaching people and leading people in a completely different direction than what you know, my career and my life's been up to now in adulthood. So a couple of years ago, when I left my previous job at Ivy Church, I started something called Upward. And it's really about helping people create a life of meaning. And I guess working in a Christian environment, and particularly for a Christian organization like a church or a charity, you're surrounded by people who just got such clarity around their meaning, their purpose, their mission. And actually friends of mine who are outside of that world, particularly outside of the faith and outside of the kind of charity sector, sometimes like that. They might have a much better income than me. They might have some real clear aspirations and goals, but actually the sense of mission and meaning and purpose, I think a lot of people struggle to find the tools to be able to navigate that whole sector and sphere. So that's what I'd love to do. You know, I've got this idea of helping 1 million people create a life of meaning. And for me, that's having incredible adventures and being outrageously generous and helping other people do the same. So that's it. You know, I've got some more clarity on that, but for me, it's kind of, to some extent, a big step of faith. You know, we're having a baby, and on the day that our baby's due, I'm going to be going into entrepreneurship, which apparently is French for unemployable. So,
is it really? I did not know that. Unemployable. That's good, though. I like it. I like it. Also, it's the day you're going to become a full-time, well, I guess temporarily, maybe a full-time father.
Yes, absolutely.
Father.
Yeah. So it's an exciting time. Yeah.
It is. And you mentioned, I mean, I love that. I love the 1 million people. You know, I love big, scary, hairy dreams, right? It's just think big. That's what really, you know, you shoot for something really far ahead, and somewhere along the way, you're going to hit some big, massive goals and milestones anyway. You mentioned, really interestingly, when you're working in the church, you're looking around and you're surrounded by people who have clarity and have meaning and mission and a purpose. But then outside of that, they don't. And so you want to help them navigate that, or they don't have the tools, right?
That's right.
Do they know then? Would you say, like, how will they know that they're lacking that? They're lacking a mission, or lacking a vision, or a purpose?
Yeah, I've found that a lot of people don't spend a huge amount of time on these kind of higher level questions in terms of, what is my purpose in life? Where do I want to be in 10, 15, 20 years time? What are the clear steps to get there? Who would I do that with? I think mostly people survive, sadly, in this state of, kind of getting through to the next Friday, making it through to the weekend, or, something like 76% of people just hate their jobs and go to work on a Monday and loathe it. And it's not an existence, it's not the way that we're created to live. I believe that we're created for life to the full, in a way that connects with other people, where we really come alive in what we do. I think even work can be part of that. It's possible to work in a way that really brings you to life, not sucks the life out of you. Same with relationships. I think relationships can do the same. They can either give life to you or suck the life out of you. And a lot of people don't spend much time outside of just the treadmill of daily existence thinking about these things. So some of the tools are really simple, but I've found that a lot of people, I guess, unlike a church environment where every Sunday you have an hour out at least where you're thinking about the higher questions of life, a lot of people don't have that opportunity or don't think about it. Some people do, but my experience has been. And so I guess my hope is that I can connect with some people who might have that aspiration and give them the connection points and the tools and the right questions to be able to create a life of meaning, is my phrase around that.
That's great. And it sounds very flexible. It doesn't sound like something that currently exists. Am I right? Is this to do with your entrepreneurial spirit coming out here?
Yes, I think so. Most entrepreneurship is remixing stuff. There's a verse in the Bible, which I don't think is completely true, that says there's nothing new under the sun. I think it is true in terms of what the Bible says, but I think most things that are new are remixes. There's a guy called Erwin McManus who's a pastor and an author, and he's got TED Talks out there, and he talks about an artisan soul. He wrote a book about it, and it's this idea that something in us has this innate creativity, and that we're made to bring something new into the world. So some of my stuff is new, some of it's remixed. I was really inspired by a book called Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, who's a Holocaust survivor. And while he was in a concentration camp, he had all of these aspirations about when he gets out, he really wants to start teaching and write books and do all this stuff. But he actually found meaning in a Nazi concentration camp through three really simple things. The first one was looking for a redemptive perspective on the worst of human suffering. Almost like, what are some things in here that can be redeeming or even a positive thing? The second one was having a positive project to work on. And the third one was having a community around him. So he found that got him through that absolutely hellish place. But actually he went out of there to create this idea of logotherapy, which is really what I'm trying to do through Upward, is help people through this process of searching for meaning and creating a life of meaning through a similar framework. So some of it's new, some of it's borrowed. I like the phrase remixed. Really kind of bringing something new to the world, but drawing from ideas from the very best thinkers and also from my faith as well.
Yeah, sure. That sounds amazing. And further, further testament to the life that you've been living so far, really. You're being authentic along the way. You research so much, and it's all driven by the clarity of this mission that you have. And even though you can't see a clear path, you're stepping into it anyway. You pretty much, you're stepping into the unknown with bold faith and courage.
Yeah, it feels like it. And it's funny because you probably feel the same, Andy. I know you're on quite a similar journey to some extent in terms of really trying to get into the coaching space in a big way and some of this video stuff. And I can really picture where I'd love to be in 1, 3, 5, 10 years and almost visualize and imagine that. But the idea of getting to next month and the month after, and the work and the connection points and the learning and the unknown and the risk of it, it can be terrifying, but at the same time it can be energizing and exciting. And I think it's that kind of two tracks of anyone who's an entrepreneur or starting something new or taking that leap of faith. It's incredibly exciting, but at the same time, that risk makes it terrifying, and you want to poop your pants half the time as well. So it's a good place to be.
So you're kind of riding that tension.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much. I have one last question for you, and I think you might have just really covered it in the last few minutes here, is how do you intend to increase your impact going forward?
Yeah. So something that I've been battling with in this journey is that I'm not an internet marketer. And I think if you're trying to start an online business, or anyone who's trying to bootstrap something new, you do everything. You're the web designer, you're the marketer, you're the finance guy, you do the whole thing, because it's just kind of that solopreneur thing. And I think a challenge for people who are in this space is trying to not just have your time sucked into the nuts and bolts of kind of the back end of the business, but actually connecting with real human beings. And so the first thing I want to do is coach people, get alongside people, meet with people who have got this aspiration to kind of, I guess, spend some time looking at themselves, figuring out kind of who they are, and then getting to a point where they've got real clarity on their future and supporting them. And like I said, encouraging them in that. Second part of it is finding a group of people who have always had that idea or passion or dream to start something new, a business or a social enterprise that can really make a difference, and coach them and have this kind of, I've got this idea for a launch lab, which is this idea of getting a load of potential entrepreneurs together on a journey to get from dream to reality in a load of businesses. So that's the first thing I'm going to be doing. I'm also launching a podcast, going to start blogging regularly, doing some writing, but also connecting where possible. And I think, like we mentioned earlier, this idea of reaching 1 million people can sound really exciting and getting you to dream big. But for me, it's like if I can connect with 10, 15 people every day, every week, and see lives change and a difference made there, that's fulfilling for me. Also, alongside that, me and Hannah have got some real dreams to travel and get out of the city and see some of the world. And so I'm really hoping that I can create something that's really compatible with that and help people along the way. So yeah,
that's so good. That's so good, Matty. That's amazing. Really good. And you're absolutely right. Like you dream big, and you turn that dream into a reality by having a clear plan, and then to execute that plan is those actions, the daily consistent actions that you mentioned there, and that's what creates the momentum. You focus on those type of habits and those type of activities, and then somehow before you know it, it's like 1,000,001 people.
Yeah.
Get out the champagne.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's great. Matty, thank you so much for your time. You and Hannah, beautiful couple. Your parents are amazing too. We just, actually we spent New Year's at your parents' beautiful cottage out in the middle of nowhere. That was incredible. The small little village had this tradition where all the villagers would come out into the middle of the road, hold hands, and sing "Auld Lang Syne." In turning into the year. Somehow I missed that. I found myself sat in the pub all by myself drinking my pint.
I remember, yeah.
But I heard them singing, and I'm sure it was a fantastic time. So, Matty, thank you so much again.
It's been great. Thanks, Andy.
And I wish you well.
Good stuff. Can I ask you one question before we
absolutely.
Okay, so people watching this video, and I know you're doing a series of these, what do you hope people watching get out of these? Because I asked you this just before, and I think it's really interesting because not everyone has the aspiration to just record loads of videos, put them out there. And I'm really fascinated by people who do, because there's something about you that I know is actually taking that action and doing something every day that makes a difference. And so, yeah, what is it for you, if you don't mind me asking? Wow,
this is the first question coming back at me. I love it, and it's a great question. And thanks for giving me the opportunity to share this, Matty. I've been really blessed, and I am really blessed to be in such a strong community of people from all walks of life, from different areas of my life, whether that be because it's people I play sport with or people I work with, family and friends and extensions of friends, and my church community. And I'm always having conversations that inspire me, that encourage me, that challenge me, and keep me accountable indirectly, in a sense. And so when I walk away from that conversation, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, wouldn't it be so great if there was a way that that person's story could be shared? And if there was somebody else in addition to me who got some encouragement or some inspiration from that, wouldn't that be worth doing? And so that's what came to mind. And I set everything up very quickly. Like, you know how things just don't feel like work when you love doing it. It took me like just one evening to set everything up and automate everything. And I started sending out invitations to people like yourself who'd be willing to take part. And so, yeah, these interviews really are an opportunity to find out about the person. I've had people ask me, Andy, what's the agenda here? What do you want me to say? What do you want me to talk about? And I think it's actually not about me. There's no agenda. It's not about a particular expertise that you have. It's not about picking your brain for some free knowledge because you're a doctor or a lawyer or you know something about computers. It's nothing to do with that. In fact, it's digging underneath the surface and finding out actually how your experience, your values and your beliefs have shaped you, how they have influenced the decisions that you've made to become the person that you are, to become that expert, if you like, or to end up not going to university, or to choose this path of entrepreneurship, or to choose to travel around the world. So that's really the reason, Matty. And it's great that you ask. I have no I have no strategy. I don't even know what I'm doing. Like, all I know is that people are saying yes to this. I'm thinking this is fantastic. I thoroughly enjoy it. I hope the person being interviewed really enjoys these. And we'll see what happens as I continue.
Good stuff, mate. Well, it's been an honor. Thanks for interviewing me. Really
You're having to sign off the interview now. No, it's been a great time, Matty. And since we live so close, let's go and grab that curry sometime.
Amen. Let's do it. Yes.
Right. Thanks. Bye for now.
Thank you, mate. Bye.